Donc bonjour, et c'est un vrai privilège pour nous d'accueillir Michael Fried et 𝙩𝙤𝙢𝙥𝙨, que je remercie de partager avec nous ces 3 jours de travail. C'est un privilège déjà d'avoir pouvoir entendre Michael Fried pendant une conférence, qu'il était d'accord pour participer à tous ces séminaires. Je te remercie vraiment beaucoup. Alors, je vais dire 2 mots à propos de Michael Fried dans une minute. Je voulais juste rappeler, pour ceux qui sont là pour la première fois, un peu l'histoire de cette recherche qui est née à son 2e volet. Donc, la première partie s'appelait Face au réel, la construction du réel dans l'art contemporain. Et ça a été publié dans un volume vous avez vu, en principe, qu'on va faire circuler tout à l'heure, cet après-midi. Et cette nouvelle partie portera d'une façon plus précise sur la relation entre l'art contemporain et les temps de l'histoire. Donc elle porte le nom acte, art contemporain et temps de l'histoire. Ça peut paraître étrange de commencer cette recherche avec une contribution de Michael Fried dont le travail est très engagé sous la dimension proprement artistique et esthétique et formelle des objets. Mais quand je dis temps de l'histoire, il faut entendre derrière une notion d'histoire qui peut avoir différentes significations, mais qui, dans le cas de ce qui va nous intéresser ces jours-ci, serait plus précis de définir un terme d'historicité plutôt que d'histoire. Alors j'espère que les participants vont arriver bientôt, on aura un peu de concentration. Donc historicité, histoire, historicité, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire ? Je pense qu'il faut se référer, et peut-être que Michael Fried le fera lui-même dans les séminaires qui suivent à propos de ce livre, que certains d'entre vous ont eu entre les mains. Donc, Why Photography Matters as Art as Never Before. Il faut se référer à la phénoménologie, à la philosophie de Martin Heidegger, et où la question de l'historicité est posée dans des termes apparemment très simples, c'est-à-dire le fait d'être assigné à un temps qui est un temps historique, mais qui est le temps dans lequel on est plongé. Alors, la thèse de Heidegger, et qui est développée dans le livre de Michael Fried autour d'un certain nombre de photographes dont il sera question dans les prochains jours, c'est que pour percevoir cet être-là, cette dimension d'appartenir à une situation donnée, à une situation contingente, eh bien, il n'y a que les œuvres d'art qui le permettent, cette prise de conscience. Donc, je pense on aura le temps de parler plus longuement de ce grand livre autour de la photographie demain avec 𝙩𝙤𝙢𝙥𝙨. Je voulais peut-être rappeler les principes qui animent notre travail commun. C'est donc un travail qui se fait entre l'école des hautes études et l'école des Beaux-arts de Lyon, avec une équipe mixte de chercheurs et de jeunes artistes diplômés ou étudiants de l'école des Beaux-arts. Le thème, comme vous pouvez l'entendre, est très large, c'est-à-dire la temporalité, le temps, dans son rapport à l'art. Mais nous sommes donné un certain nombre de règles, dont une n'est pas une règle, c'est une question de temps, c'est-à-dire qu'on prend le temps. On prend le temps à la fois avec la personne que nous invitons et à la fois pour développer la recherche. Par rapport à la recherche précédente, celle-ci est structurée d'une façon un peu plus forte, c'est-à-dire qu'il y aura des séminaires tout le long de l'année prochaine à Paris et un colloque qui sera organisé à la fin de ce séminaire, qui a 2 personnes qui sont en charge de coordonner cette recherche, qui sont Morad Montazami et Émilie Parando qui sont là. Et que le principe de recherche est que tout le monde y participe. C'est la même règle qui vaut ces jours-ci, c'est-à-dire que c'est un séminaire, qu'il n'y a pas c'est pas un colloque, qu'il y a une discussion qui est aussi importante que la présentation des arguments. Donc vous êtes invités à vous exprimer quand il sera le moment, en posant des questions ou en présentant vos remarques. Michael parlera en anglais, mais il peut très bien suivre et répondre à des questions formulées en français. Donc peut-être avant que je le présente un peu mieux, tu veux dire quelque chose sur la recherche? Non?
Je pense qu'on a...
Donc j'ai... Michael Fried a commencé à la fin des années 60 à prendre position par rapport à l'art minimaliste. Il s'est posé un certain nombre de questions dans les relations entre le spectateur et l'œuvre ou l'objet, et sur l'expérience qui est celle de se trouver devant une œuvre. Alors, ça a été les débuts d'une discussion, d'une polémique très aiguë et très riche qui a marqué l'art contemporain depuis lors et qui a amené Michael Fried à construire une sorte d'archéologie de cette question critique, qui était d'abord une question critique. Donc, la suite de ces travaux sont une archéologie de la question du spectateur, à commencer par la place du spectateur, qui est une réflexion autour de l'esthétique de Diderot et des artistes dont il est question chez Diderot. C'est chez Diderot que cette problématique du spectateur acquiert un aspect très spécifique, très particulier. C'est l'idée du théâtre et de l'antithéâtre, de la théâtralité ou de l'antithéâtralité. Donc le fait qu'une bonne peinture doit être celle qui, comme dans une bonne pièce de théâtre, ne prévoit pas de parois transparentes vers le spectateur, mais où tout se passe comme si le spectateur n'était pas là. Et donc dans ces livres, comme dans le livre qui a suivi, et qui porte autour de la peinture de Courbet, dont il sera un peu question aujourd'hui, il est question de voir comment différentes générations d'artistes ont fait en sorte de s'affronter à ces paradoxes d'une peinture qui est bien sûr faite pour être vue, mais qui implique idéalement qu'il n'y ait pas de spectateurs devant. Donc là, je ne vais pas prendre toute l'après-midi pour parcourir ces livres qui sont d'une grande richesse et qui aboutissent dans ce troisième moment sur le moment de Manet, c'est-à-dire le moment où cette présupposition qu'il n'y ait personne devant les tableaux d'une certaine façon ne peut plus tenir, et donc Manet choisit une solution radicale, c'est de montrer alors comment traduire facingless, la facialité, le fait pour la peinture d'être de face, non seulement parce que les personnes... Face à facité. Donc non seulement les personnages de Manet sont de face, mais c'est la peinture elle-même qui se présente de face. Et alors, dans une peinture, apparemment, dans un premier moment, on pourrait la décrire comme théâtrale, dans la mesure où le spectateur est devant les tableaux, mais il y a toujours des solutions pour ramener la dimension contraire de l'antithéâtralité ou de l'absorption dans ces perspectives. Donc, je pense qu'on va laisser pour aujourd'hui un peu de côté les livres sur la photographie. Je veux dire simplement que c'est l'ensemble de ces problématiques qui, d'après Fried, fait retour d'une façon assez puissante chez certains photographes à partir des années 80 et jusqu'à aujourd'hui. C'est dans un dialogue intense avec chacun d'entre eux. Ils sont abordés chacun séparément ou dans des chapitres parfois groupés. Donc on en parlera plus précisément demain. Aujourd'hui, j'ai fait quelque chose d'assez égoïste. Je me fais un peu un cadeau à moi-même, c'est-à-dire j'ai demandé à Michael s'il voulait bien commencer par le travail en cours, qui est un travail qui porte sur Caravage. Et vous pouvez imaginer combien ça m'intéresse personnellement, mais je pense que ça va intéresser aussi tout le monde ici, parce que dans ces travaux, certains des thèmes et des problèmes qui seront repris dans la discussion et dans les commentaires et l'analyse de ces photographies seront repris. Donc, est-ce qu'il faut rajouter quelque chose? Tu veux dire quelque chose? Donc, Michael, merci. Je te laisse la parole.
So, can we make the room darker? Right. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to, as Giovanni Carreri said, I'm going to speak in English, but I'm happy to take questions in French. And also, if there's anything I've said that isn't clear, just ask me to go over it. Can we make it even darker? Yeah. Good. Great. Is that okay? I mean, what's really important is that we, can see the pictures. So, again, as Giovanni Carreri explained, I began writing about art in my very early 20s as an art critic. But very early, I also decided that I would become an art historian, and I studied art history at Harvard. And while I was studying, I was writing art criticism and very involved in the abstract, above all, painting and sculpture of the 1960s. And then I wrote against minimalism in an essay called Art and Objecthood, and some of you will know about that. What emerged for me at that moment, again, as Giovanni Carreri said, was the issue of the question, the problématique of the relation between the work and the spectateur. And then, as a scholar, it's perfectly true. What I wanted to understand was the prehistory of that. You could, as Giovanni said, the archaeology of that. The other deep motivation for all the work that I did as an art historian was to try to understand Manet, right? And Manet, above all, in the 𝙩𝙤𝙦𝙙𝙪. Okay, for me, to this day, there's the history of art for thousands of years before the 𝙩𝙤𝙦𝙙𝙪, and then there's the history of art after the 𝙩𝙤𝙦𝙙𝙪. And the 𝙩𝙤𝙦𝙙𝙪 remains for me the most amazing single artifact that anybody ever made. And someday I would like to think that I understand it. But what this meant was trying to find a place in time to go back to where one could begin to unpack, develop a problem, a historical problematic that could lead to Manet in the 1860s. And that turned out to be, it wasn't just obvious that it would be the case, but it turned out to be France and the middle of the 18th century. Right? It turned out to be that if you went back to the 1750s and 1760s in France, something began. I mean, nothing in art ever begins absolutely, but nevertheless, something began that you could follow as it developed dialectically, eventually to Manet, and then beyond. I mean, I would say to the present moment. And the crucial issue proved to be something about the relationship between the work of art and the beholder, the spectateur. At the beginning of this development was a kind of reaction against the Rococo in France. And at the beginning of this development also was this unbelievably attractive, great genius, Diderot, writing the most distinguished, the best, the most brilliant art criticism and theory of painting that anyone ever wrote. So it's kind of historical luck, for someone like me making my way back to the middle of the 18th century to find waiting for me there 𝙩𝙯𝙩. At a moment when I would say the writings had not, in a certain, they had been worked on by a generation or two of great European scholars, but they had been worked on in a purely academic, scholarly way. I'm not saying that negatively. All that work was necessary to recover these texts. Remember, they were not published in Diderot's lifetime, right? Diderot published very little in his lifetime. He wrote these in a kind of journal that was called the Correspondance Littéraire that was not even published. It was circulated in a very small number of handwritten numbers to royal houses elsewhere in Europe. All this was edited by his friend Grimm. That's a whole other story. But it was a huge effort of scholarship to establish the corpus of Diderot's writings in a reliable way, including his art criticism, his salon, and other writings. In fact, when I first realized that was all there, it was very daunting because there was so much writing that one had to deal with. And in fact, the other thing you realize about Diderot, if you start to get involved with him at all, is that everything is connected to everything else. You can't just say to yourself, well, I'll read the art criticism, but I don't have to read this. You have to read a whole lot, and then you have to read about the whole period. And you know, this is one of the things you do if you are a historian, an art historian. I have always loved doing that. And for me, there is, in a way, no tension between doing that and being involved in contemporary art. I don't feel any big shifting of gears when I move from writing and thinking about art from the 17th century on and contemporary art. It feels like some version of the same activity. Anyway, when you get back to Diderot, you see that this problem of the beholder was crucial for him and that hadn't been seen. And so it was very exciting to me to work that out and to work it out in terms of the painting of his time. Crucially, Chardin and Greuze and Fragonard and David and so on. And that was the first book, Le Place du Spectateur. And then, in English, Absorption and Theatricality, Painting and Beholder in the Age of Diderot. And then the question was how to move on. And I decided that the next place to sort of attack would be Courbet. Because Courbet as this great realist was not someone that anyone had ever even remotely imagined could be understood in these terms. And remember, I want to say a little bit about this because it's relevant to Caravage. Nothing, in my experience, nothing in all of art history, or I'd say even art theory, has been more misunderstood than questions of realism. Realism is one of the things that has really largely defeated commentary when talking about visual art, but talking about literature too. And Courbet is one of the great realists of the 19th century. Caravaggio is one of the great realists of all time. Caravaggio and Courbet are among the greatest realist painters. I think that the way to try to understand realism is not to ask, what is realism? Right? That would seem like a theoretically interesting way to do it. I think if you go after it that way, you get nowhere. You create some artificial theory that doesn't have any force. For me, the way I always want to attack anything like this is through the particular instances. So the question would be, what's Courbet's realism like? How does Courbet's realism work? How does Courbet's painting work? How does Caravaggio's painting work? It turns out, again, I want to make this claim, but I'll be showing you this in a moment, that for Courbet, too, in a way that is, I think you will see, very surprising, the issue of the relationship of the painting to the beholder is crucial. Let me put this as simply, dramatically as I can. Imagine this is the painting. This is the face of the painting. It's a realist painting. The discussion always traditionally concerns the idea that there's an image here and there's the world here. And in a realist painting, there has to be some kind of match, equivalence between the image here and the world there. You see what I'm saying? If we think that way, you don't get anywhere. Just tell you this, you just don't get anywhere. It doesn't pay off. It turns out that again and again and again, the action in the painting that we're going to be talking about is this side of the picture, right? Not this side of the picture. It's this side of the picture. It's between the picture and the viewer. And crucially, for both Courbet and Caravaggio, between the picture and the first viewer, namely the artist, Courbet, Caravaggio. And again, that's going to turn out to be true. So one larger implication, let's say, for me, of my own work, has been to move the emphasis from imagining this relationship to trying to understand this relationship. And then I went on, after the Courbet book, to do a book on Manet. And Manet being a moment when something about the whole Diderottian tradition of trying in some way to deny or negate or neutralize the beholder gives out, and the painting faces the beholder with a kind of new force. So in the course of writing this trilogy, and the Manet moment is then the beginning of something called modernism in painting. And Manet is often understood in terms of modernist painting means flatness. But I don't think that's what is going on in Manet. I think the facing is not the same as flatness. Flatness is going to be something that happens later. But having done Courbet, I then realized that it opened up a way of thinking about realist painting for me, and I wrote two other books about other great realist painters in the 19th century. One is the American painter Thomas Eakins, and the third is a completely great artist, but you probably aren't familiar with him, and that is a great German painter and draftsman named Adolf Menzel, M-E-N-Z-E-L. Barely known outside of Germany, and even the Germans have no idea how great he is. Right? Very great artist. All right, but at a certain moment, having done this work and having developed this way of thinking about realism, I found myself in the National Gallery in London, standing in front of this picture. So this is a Caravaggio from the 1590s. Caravaggio is born in 1571 in the town of Caravaggio. His real name was Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, so we end up calling him Caravaggio. He's born there in 1571, and he is trained in Milan with an artist named Simone Pettazano, it doesn't matter. And then he makes his way to Rome. Around 1590. We don't know exactly when he arrives in Rome. And we know that he has a few hard years in Rome, sort of working for other artists. And then he starts to have a certain success. And what that means is that his pictures start to be acquired by a very, very, very refined, wealthy but also refined, cultured group of collectors. And he even moves into two of their palaces at different times. So we have an image of Caravaggio as a complete outlaw. And after a certain moment he is. He kills a man in 1606. And after that he's on the run. And even before that he was a dangerous, unstable person. He is not somebody you'd want to share an apartment with. But he wasn't living a kind of life on the run at that point. He was being supported by very wealthy collectors, and he could take his time making exquisitely beautiful paintings. So this is one of the paintings that he makes. Let's call it, for the sake of argument, 1595. So he's about 24, 25 years old. And this is a picture that would have been acquired by these collectors. And it's now in the National Gallery in London. Much, much smaller, of course, than the image you're seeing on the screen. And the title we have for it is something like Boy Bitten by a Lizard. And can you see this? It's hard to see, but there's a lizard at the bottom of the picture that is biting, thank you, Giovanni, that is biting the middle finger of the boy. And the boy cries out in pain and makes some kind of gesture. And the question is, right, this is how it works, right? What's going on here? How should we think about this picture? In fact, over the last, say, 30 years, there's been an unbelievable amount of writing about this picture. It has been interpreted and interpreted and interpreted in all sorts of ways. It has been seen as maybe a study, one of a series having to do with different senses. This would be the sense of touch. It's been seen in terms of Christian symbolism. It's been seen in all sorts of ways. The boy himself has been seen as of perhaps homosexual sexuality, and so on and so forth. It just goes on and on and on. Anyway, I was standing in front of this in the National Gallery. And for me, everything that I've done, right, when anything I write about, comes out of looking at something, often for a long time, and suddenly, one day, seeing something, or thinking that I'm seeing something, and then trying to work with, trying to think about this thing that I'm seeing. And what I was seeing about this picture, what I came to think I saw, wouldn't have been possible for me to see except on the basis of the previous work that I had done on Courbet. So that's one of the ways in which one advances. Right? The work that you do and the way in which you come to understand certain things for yourself and in your own work then sets up a framework that lets you, if it's true, if there's anything accurate about it, it then sets up a framework where you see things that you couldn't otherwise have seen, and that sets up a frame, and so on and so forth. Okay, that's what a certain kind of advance just for oneself is like. So I was looking at this picture, and there's also always been a little bit the question with this picture. Who was the model for the boy? Was the model maybe even Caravaggio himself? And part of the writing around that, and Courbet is another artist who did many, many self-portraits at the beginning of his career. And one of the bêtises of the history of art is to say in those situations, well, Caravaggio or Courbet was very, very poor. He couldn't afford models. That's why he painted himself. Right? I hope you just feel the idiocy of that, right? All the artist has to do is say to some friend, come in here and sit for 2 hours. Right? That's not why someone paints themselves, because they don't have money. If an artist is painting himself or herself a whole lot, especially at the beginning of the career, there's something interesting going on there. It may not be the same thing every time, but there's something to think about. more than just that the person doesn't have money. So I was looking at this and looking, and I suddenly thought, okay. And maybe the best way I can help you, take this in, right? The boy is sitting there. He's not facing us exactly, right, with his body. His body is turned at an angle into the space, okay? Then you see his right hand in the picture being bitten by the lizard. And then what's his left hand doing? Right? Well, within the fiction of the picture, the left hand is just gesture, right? But you've got one hand here and one hand here. And he is half turned in space with his face turned to us. And notice, by the way, notice that scarf, this thing that just goes off like that. Right? That's not, strictly speaking, realistic. One of the other things that's said about this picture is it's instantaneous. And this is going to be a thing that's said about Caravaggio by everyone. Louis Marin, in his wonderful book, Détruire la peinture, says of Caravaggio, the mode is always instantaneous. Right? That's the idea. To this I want to say yes and no. Okay? But the sense here is of this instantaneous encounter, the pain. Various art historians, very distinguished art historians, say it's above all, it must be a study in expression. The young artist, maybe even studying his own expression, to gain a mastery of the depiction of expression, presents himself as a boy bitten by a lizard crying out in pain. So that's what the picture's about. Okay, so I want you just to imprint the structure of this painting, okay? Could we have the next slide, please? Yeah, perfect. So that's Matisse, a self-portrait from 1918. And take a moment to think about that. Think about what its structure is. Can we go back to the boy, just so that, do that again? Now go to the Matisse again. So how does the Matisse work? What's the structure? Tell me. If we believe the picture, now, when we have a picture, all we know is the picture. So it's possible that Matisse made this painting, what can I say, in the middle of a desert somewhere, not in a room, right? He may have made it while he was standing on his head. The circumstances may bear no relation to anything that the picture shows us. That seems very unlikely, but I just want to acknowledge the possibility. But if we believe the picture, if we take the picture as some kind of evidence for how it got made, how did it get made? The mirror. Where's the mirror? Well, let's see. Let's do this. Okay, I'm Matisse. I'm here. Where's the mirror? Yeah, the mirror's here. Where's the canvas? Here. So already you see the structure we're talking about. Right? It's in a way clear, but it's interesting. It's clear, but it's not completely obvious. The mirror's here. The canvas is here. I'm Matisse. I'm holding the palette in my left hand, but in the mirror I see it as if it's in my right hand. I'm looking at myself here, and I'm pivoting back and forth. Right? I'm painting on the canvas what I see in the mirror. And here you can see just the edge of the canvas down there. You see the little tack marks? Okay? Notice how strange the palette and the thumb are. You see what's happened there? This isn't easy to do. It isn't easy for an artist making a self-portrait to paint his mirror or her mirror reverse image, because that's the left. If I'm looking in the mirror, I see the left hand as the right hand, and there's a kind of tension that develops between what I see, which is a left hand, which is a right hand, and what I know is my left hand. You know, this is my right hand, and it's more, you could say, more dominant. Not only that, but look at the tilt of the palette. You see what he's done. He's holding the palette, this, and what he's done here for this is, in a sense, he's painted it this way. You see the way he sees it. So the tilt there is, you know, it's very unlikely that he's sitting with the palette tilted like that, so that it goes up like that in the mirror. In fact, this is a place where, phenomenologically, his body feeling is dominating what he sees in the reflection. You certainly see it. Immediately, what I want you to see here is the way in which the picture becomes a kind of force field, right? Kind of elaborate battleground, compromise structure between seeing a reversed image and feeling what you're doing and painting what you're feeling. And it's again and again, we tend to forget, right, that again and again artists are, I mean, this is one of the ways in which we are thinking about realism goes wrong. We think that what a realist painting does is simply look like the world, right? The world's out there, it's an appearance, right? Make it look like the world, but a realist picture. But the painter is making a painting. That's the first thing the painter's doing. And making a painting as an embodied person, a person with two hands, with a body, sitting in a chair. Well, let's say in this case, sitting in a chair, which means you feel something under your behind, you feel something against your back, you're holding this thing. And in a picture like this seemingly quite serene Matisse, all of this stuff is happening. But then let's say, okay, he finishes the picture. And then you see what he does. The mirror's here, the canvas is here. It's as if what he does is take the picture and get rid of the mirror. You know, someone takes away the mirror, he hangs the picture here. And the picture contains the evidence of that way in which it got made. So I'm going to call that a right angle mirror reflection self-portrait. Okay, I'm going to call it a right angle mirror reflection self-portrait. Art historians have been, now, thousands and thousands and thousands of self-portraits that you will see in museums got made out over the centuries. It's not that that has been completely unknown to artists, to historians writing about them. But no one has ever seen that that is a kind of like major dispositif, right? That's one of the fundamental ways in which self-portraits have been made. Now there's a further wrinkle in all this, and that is, in the Matisse, the image is mirror reversed, as we would say, right? The brush is in his left hand, the palette is in his right hand. We know Matisse was right-handed. So the palette would have been in his left hand and the brush in his right hand. When he looked in the mirror, he saw it this way, and he paints it this way. Now here's an amazing fact. In the history of painting, what painters making self-portraits, holding brushes and palettes, there are almost no instances of the painters depicting themselves mirror reversed before a certain moment. In other words, the norm was, if you show yourself with a brush and a palette, you undo the mirror reversal, you present yourself, you normalize your image, you present yourself in a normal way. The brush in the right hand, the palette in the left hand. Until 1860. 1860, which is also the moment of Manet, and the moment, I mean, Courbet is also, you know, it's a certain moment in realism. But in 1860, suddenly it's as if some instructions go out from a central office somewhere. And all over the world, painters start depicting themselves in a mirror-reversed way. It becomes okay. It isn't mandatory. They can still normalize if they want to. But starting around 1860, it becomes standard, becomes common for mirror